vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu oy velanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu oy velanu shelo yachot bi levo oh madeleine no khaloy seinu shelo yachot bi levo oh madeleine no khaloy seinu hello shabachal doim doim roisim aleinu l'chaloy seinu oyoknim aleinu l'chaloy seinu oyoknim aleinu l'chaloy seinu
Already, Father coming out today, goes open.
Matzilenu mi yodo ve'hakodesh baruch hu Matzilenu mi yodo ay ve'hakodesh baruch hu Matzilenu mi yodo ay ve'hakodesh baruch hu Matzilenu mi yodo ay ve'hishayam do lavoy seinu vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu I vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu I vilanu shelo yachot bi levo oh madeleine no khaloy seinu shelo yachot bi levo oh madeleine no khaloy seinu Lavoy seinu vilanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu oy velanu he sheyam da lavoy seinu vilanu lavoy seinu velanu
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Shir, which is the Kabbalah of Matzah. It's fascinating that the Baal Shem Tov writes in Keser Shem Tov that the Tzaddik Hador is a Baal Teshuvah, which means that in every generation, the Gemara says there are 36 tzaddikim, but then there is the tzaddik Yesod Olam. there is the one sadiq who is the foundation of the whole world, which we refer to as the sadiq hador. And the Baal Shem Tov writes in Keser Shem Tov that the tzaddik of the generation is a Baal Teshuvah. What does this mean? The Baal Shem Tov gives a most beautiful interpretation of this. And he says that the tzaddik of the generation is the Baal, he is the owner of Teshuvah in a generation. In other words, every generation has its challenges. Every generation has its unique Mitzrayim, Egypt, its pharaohs, its river Nile. And in each generation, there needs to be an exodus from that Egypt. In fact, what started 3,334 years ago was the beginning of the exodus. And that's been one long continuum and will continue until Mashiach comes, when we'll have the final redemption. And each stage and in each generation, B'chol dor v'dor, chayev adam lirois es atzmei, a person must see themselves as if they are actually going out of Mitzrayim in the present. And just like then, there was a Moshe Rabbeinu in the generation who told the Yidden what to do. Similarly, in our generation, we merited to have a tzaddik hador, who is the Baal Teshuvah in the generation, the owner of Teshuvah in the generation. What does that mean? It's well known that the Rebbe initiated many mitzvah campaigns, starting off with the original mitzvahim, the original campaigns, the Tefillin campaign, Torah, lighting Shabbos candles, tzedakah, koshering kitchens, mezuzah, taharas hamishpacha, and so on and so forth. But when it came to Pesach, the Rebbe said that all his shluchim, and by extension, anybody who has been influenced by the Rebbe, should distribute Matzah Shmura to everybody they know. Yes, of course, you fulfill your obligation with regular Matzah. However, it's best performed through Matzah Shmura, hand-baked Shmura Matzah. That is the choicest and best way to perform the mitzvah of eating matzah on Seder nights. After all, there are two biblically mandated mitzvahs on Seder night. The first is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling over the story of the Exodus. And the second is the eating of the matzah. The maror and the 4 cups are all rabbinic, although extremely important and intrinsic in the Seder, but nevertheless are rabbinic in origin. Today, the biblically mandated mitzvahs are those of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling over the Haggadah, and eating the matzah. And in the matzah itself, the Rebbe said that the matzah which we should give everybody to eat on the Seder night, as mandated in Shulchan Aruch, is matzah shmura. And I want to approach this from a Kabbalistic perspective tonight, based on a beautiful discourse of the Alter Rebbe in his Sefer Lekutei Torah and Parshas Tzav, where the Alter Rebbe addresses a very key question in the Haggadah. But my destination this evening, where I want to arrive at, is to explain why the Rebbe put emphasis on this. Being the Baal Teshuvah, the owner of Teshuvah in a generation, it means that the tzaddik of the generation has the keys to open up the hearts and souls of the generation. So when the Rebbe said, put tefillin on a soldier, or on a Jew who has never put tefillin on beforehand, or a girl should light Shabbos candles, that is actually the key in this generation to Teshuvah in this generation. Hence, the tzaddik of the generation is a Baal Teshuvah, is the owner of Teshuvah in the generation. When it comes specifically to Pesach, in addition to requesting that we should aid and assist anybody who needs Sorchei Hachag, the needs of Pesach, the Rebbe insisted that his shluchim should distribute matzah shmura to everybody they knew. In fact, the Rebbe himself did it. He gave out matzah to shluchim, and in those days, if a person, even before Pesach, got a little piece of the Rebbe's shmura matzah, it was considered something amazing. Why? What is the secret of the matzah? What is in this piece of matzah that is so vastly important? That's our destination this evening. And in order to do that, as I said beforehand, we're going to start expounding the Maimah of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah in Parshas Tzav, which is based on the Haggadah. Lahavin Mashakosav Haggadah, the Alter Rebbe starts off. Let's first of all understand what is written in the Haggadah, Matzah zu she'anu oich. You know, Rabban Gamliel said that somebody who doesn't say the three things on the night of the Seder has not fulfilled their obligation. They have to say Pesach, Matzah, and Moreh. And the Haggadah itself then goes on and says, Pesach, what do we mean when we say Pesach? And then Matzah, what do we mean when we say Matzah? Why do we eat the Matzah? And then it goes on to the Moreh. So by Matzah, it says, Matzah zu she'anu oich, this Matzah which we're eating tonight, and we're sharing with the participants at the Seder table. What is the reason we're eating the Matzah? Al Shum, says the Haggadah, shalehispik v'tzeker shalavasenu lahachmitz, because then, since they were driven out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, and there was no time for the dough to rise, therefore they baked matzahs, and this is the reason that we eat matzah on the Seder night. The Alter Rebbe asks a simple, straightforward question. If you read the parsha, which discusses the instructions of Moshe Rabbeinu to the Jewish people before the Exodus, he tells them, Be'oser lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of the month, they should take a lamb and they should tie it to the beds, and on the 14th they should slaughter it, and they should roast it on the night, and on that night of Pesach, they should eat the Paschal lamb together with matzah and together with moreh. Bo'erev toichlu matzos. You should eat, says the Torah, matzos on the night of Pesach. And later the Torah goes and tells us that you should eat matzos for 6 days, 7 days. In fact, the rabbis say that the choiv, the obligation to eat matzah, is only the first night. You're not obligated halachically to eat matzah the rest of Pesach. The obligation is, in fact, only the first night. Nevertheless, the entire duration of Pesach, one may not eat chametz or have any chametz in our possession, which is why we need to dispose of the chametz before Pesach. Primarily, we sell our chametz to a non-Jew and then search for any leftover chametz and dispose of it. However, we don't have to eat matzah the rest of Pesach if we don't want to. But on the night of Seder, there is the obligation to eat matzah. Because the Torah says on the night of Pesach, you should eat matzahs. And if that is the case, why does the Haggadah say that the reason we eat the matzah on the night of Pesach is because the dough didn't have time to rise? It should have said the reason we eat the matzahs is because God commanded then the Jewish people and for all generations to eat matzahs on the night of Pesach. There are those that want to, and the Alter Rebbe actually brings this answer, that want to answer, Magid Meireshis Acharis, that the Torah is in fact, when it tells us to eat matzahs on the night of Pesach, is jumping forward, if you want, chronologically, and saying that the reason why we eat matzahs on the night of Pesach is because, even though this command was given before the 14th, was because on the 14th there will be the Exodus and a revelation of Hashem, the slaying of the firstborn, and then you won't have time to go out of Mitzrayim, to go out, and therefore you will bake matzahs. That is one answer. However, the Alter Rebbe explores in Likutei Torah a different answer, and a very beautiful answer that addresses the real essence of what Matzah is and how it affects us. And that's what we're going to study now. Let's first of all ask a general question. We're coming up to a Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, the Torah tells us, "V'samachta b'chagecha." You should rejoice on your festivals. The mitzvah is one of simcha. We talk about simchas Yom Tov. For men, it's eating meat and drinking wine. For women, they have a simcha in having a new garment, a new piece of jewelry. Children buy very nice nuts and other children's delicacies and so on and so forth. So everybody should have a simcha on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, Yeshaya Hanavi says, Isaiah says, "V'koroso la Shabbos oineg." You should call Shabbos a delight. Shabbos is a day of menucha, of tranquility, and we have on Shabbos oineg Shabbos. Oineg means delight, tanug, pleasure. What is the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov? Why on Yom Tov do we have simcha, and on Shabbos we have oineg? What is the difference between the two? So in order to explain the difference, I'd like to introduce you to two very good friends. Two such good friends that they're always together. They never depart from each other. They're beloved friends. They're called Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina, says the Zohar, are Terein Rein Deloi Misparshin. They are two very good friends who never separate from each other. And today we're going to talk about what's called abba and ima, father and mother. Chachma is abba and Bina is ima. Chachma is the father, Bina is the mother. When father and mother unite, they create the children, which are the midos. However, Av and Aim, Chachma and Bina, they possess, both of them, moichin. Moichin means brains. So we can talk about moichin de abba, the brains of the father, and moichin de ema, the brains of the mother. Those are two Kabbalistic terms, and we're now going to unravel their meaning, specifically explaining them in terms of Matzah. So let's start off with moichin de ema, the brain of the mother, of Bina. Now, in general, there are two types of revelation of the Oyer Ein Sof, of the infinite light of Hashem. One revelation is through Seder Hishtalshelus, the chain order of creation. From the very essence of God until the corporeal reality of this world, there is a ladder. The ladder of Jacob's ladder of various rungs of various worlds, whereby there is a transformer-like step down from the infinite into the finite. And it goes through a tzimtzum, a contraction, and various what we call worlds, which are the rungs in the ladder. And in general, we refer to the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which correlates with the four letters of the tetragrammaton of Hashem's name, Havaya, Yud, the world of Atzilus, Hey, the world of Bria, Vav, the world of Yetzira, and the final Hey, the world of Asiya. So one way of interpreting the Shem Havaya is the name that creates, the name that creates in the sense that there is this stepping down and reduction of the light into the worlds so that the worlds can perceive that light. Now, when we talk about perception, when a person perceives, grasps a higher level, that brings joy. Let me give you two mashalim, two parables in order to understand that. Let's imagine a prince who, for whatever reason, has been taken into captivity and he's languishing, distant from his father in some jail. The prince is in a terrible state, in a dark and very distant state. However, on the day that the prince exits the jail and merits to see again the face of the father, the king, there is such joy and jubilation because the prince went me'afela la'ora, from darkness to light. As we say in the Haggadah, mishibud ligula, from servitude to redemption. That brings tremendous joy. Another marshal, another parable, would be the soul and its demise from this world. In this world, the Zohar calls this world Alma de Shikra, the world of falsehood, in the sense that we don't see things with clarity in this world. In contrast, the world to come is called the Olam HaEmes, the world of truth, because everything there is seen in sharp focus for what it really is. So let me give you an example. There is a pasuk in the Torah that says, Re'ei nosati lefanecha, see, I have set before you es hachayim ve'es hatov, life and good, ve'es hamoves ve'es hara, death and evil, uvacharata v'chayim, and you should choose life. Now, if you've got a lebedika child, a lively child who's dancing in front of you, and a corpse, and you are asked to choose between the two, of course you choose the dancing child. It's a no-brainer. And if that is the case, why does the Torah say, see, I've set before you life and good and death and evil, choose life? Of course, everybody would choose life. Why does the Torah instruct us to do that? The answer is because in this world, life is dressed up as death and death looks alive. The vanities and the lures, the glitz, the facade of this world looks to us alive and something we should desire. In truth, though, it's dead. Dead in terms of there's a cessation to its enjoyment. It's nothing eternal. It's not long. It's there for a minute and then it's gone. Whereas Torah and mitzvahs, connection to Hashem, these are alive, although to some they look uninteresting. And so we need to choose life in this world. It's an alma de shikra, a world of falsehood. When a person moves out of this world and unshackles themselves from the body and its parameters, and then they can perceive higher depth, breadth in Torah, in elokus, in godliness, in the higher worlds, all of the pleasures of this world are nothing compared to that perception. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, in the Ethics of the Fathers, Yofa Shah Achas Shel Koras Ruach Ba'olam Abba Mikol Chaya Olam Hazeh. The better 1 hour of enjoyment and bliss in the world to come, then all the pleasures of this world, if we were to sum total all the pleasures, be they physical, intellectual, emotional, musical, all the various different pleasures that a person could possibly think of, and sum total them all, they don't even equal an hour of pleasure in the world to come. And how much more so, the world to come has so many various different levels. So there's the lower Garden of Eden in the world of Yetzirah, and there's the higher Garden of Eden in the world of Bria. And in fact, it says on Shabbos and yomtan and Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, we have the ability, all the souls that are in the lower Garden of Eden have the elevation that they go up to the higher Garden of Eden in order to glimpse an even higher level and appreciation and perception and understanding of the infinite. And that causes tremendous, tremendous joy. Because when a person perceives on a higher level, it's a wow. It's unimaginably joyful, and it's expressed as tremendous joy. And that's what happens on yomtan. On yomtan, in fact, we say Hallel. And in Hallel, we say the pasuk Moshivi Akeres Habayis Eim Habonim Semecha Haleluka, which means that he transforms the barren woman into a household and into a joyful mother of children. There is a sefer called Shushan Soides from the Ramban, a book of Kabbalah. He was a Talmud, a student of the Ramban, and he explains that this actually refers to the Sephira of Malchus, which during the weekday descends into the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyan. And it's like, as we said beforehand, in the mashal, in the parable of the prince that descends down into the dungeon, that it's very squalid and it's dark and so on and so forth. But on Shabbos and on yomtan, the prince goes back to the king. It goes back to the Eim Habonim, to the mother of the children, which is the Sephira of Bina, of perception and of understanding. The Eim Habonim Smecha Haleluka, and this tremendous joy. So Moichin de Eima, the brain of the mother, represents the level of our understanding, perception, and of course, it's limited in this world. The higher you go up the worlds, the greater and the deeper and the more joyful and delightful is that perception. That's called Moichin de Eima. Now let's move on to Moichin de Abba, the brain of the father. Chachma is very different than Bina. Chachma is made of the words koyach ma, the potential for something, in the sense that Chachma is the first sphera. It creates the axioms of creation. But it also has koyach, the power of ma. Ma in Hebrew always refers to the concept of bittul, of nullification. Like Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'nachnu ma." What are we? We say it in davening every day. Ma'onu, ma'chayenu, ma'chastenu, ma'tzidkenu, ma'kachenu, ma'gavurosenu. What are we? Nothing. We're ayin lefonecha. We're as if we are nothing before you. So koyach ma represents the power and the potential for bittul, for nothingness. Now, that is an infusion of a level that transcends intellect and perception. Because however great or expansive one's mind may be, ultimately it is limited to the parameters of that particular mind. However, there exists something that transcends all those limitations. Of that level, leis machshava tefisa beiklau, no thought can grasp it at all. And that is referred to as moichin de abba. It's not perception per se, but it is the feeling of complete bittul, of complete nullification and being enveloped within the divine. So hence we have the moichin de abba and the moichin de ema. In general terms, that explains the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Yom Tov is an expression of simcha, because what is revealed on Yom Tov is the moichin de ema. Whereas Shabbos, the emphasis is one of oineg. And hence, that's represented by the moichin de abba. Now, the truth is, both of them have elements of each other. There is an element of simcha also on Shabbos, and there is also an element of oineg also on Yom Tov. But we're talking here about the dominant power. On Shabbos, it's oineg. In fact, oineg, ayin nun gimel, is the Rosh Tevis, Eden Nohar Gan. Nohar is the river that goes out of Eden in order to water the Gan. The Gan is called Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And the Nohar, the river, goes out of Eden in order to water the Gan. So in fact, the Gan is in the world of Bria, or the higher Garden of Eden, the lower Garden of Eden, the world of Yetzirah. But Eden refers to the level of Chachma, or in fact, the source of Chachma, which goes and waters the Gan. That's Oineg, that's Eden Nohar Gan. In contrast, Yom Tov, the dominant power is Simcha, V'samachta b'chagecha. But since one is inclusive of the other, there also needs to be the element of moichin de abba also present by Yom Tov. Now, that usually articulates itself in the saying of Hallel and in the prayers of Yom Tov. But those are rabbinic. Mideoraisa, in its Torah form, that comes in the mitzvah, deoraisa, the mandatory mitzvah from the Torah on that Chag. And on Pesach, it's the mitzvah of Matzah. Matzah represents moichin de abba. Matzah, unlike chometz, is flat. Matzah represents humility, nothingness. It represents bittul. In contrast, chometz has leavened. It's risen. It's selfish. It's egocentric. On Pesach, we need to get rid of the chometz and we need to eat matzah. On Pesach, we need to go away from anything that gives nourishment to the negative character traits which we have. That is called in Kabbalah Yenika Lachitzonim, nourishment to the outer forces, to the pharaohs, as Paroi is Oiref, he's the neck, it's the same letters. And Paroi said of the river, Liya Oiri Vani Asisini, this river, this Nilus, this river Nile is mine, I made it. He was the anti-God, and that's why it was necessary to have the 10 plagues, which crushed that concept of his. And ultimately, he, two opinions, one opinion he was drowned by the Yamsuf, and the other opinion he's had the complete transformation when he became the king of Nineveh, and Jonah the prophet, came to him and transformed him and all his people. However, coming back to the night of Pesach, we have the moichin, the abba, the brain of Abba encapsulated in the flat bread of matzah. Now, what is fascinating is that our sages say, Ein hatinuk yodea likros abba ad sheyitom tam dogon. A baby cannot say abba, daddy, father, abba, until it's tasted grain. In other words, it can have all sorts of, it's usually nursed and it can have sort of soft foods, but until it's had grain, dogon, it can't say abba. In its spiritual context, this means that in order for a Jew to fully recognize Avinu Shabashamayim, it must first taste the grain. That grain is the grain of Matzah. And that's why the Zohar calls the Matzah Michla Dimehemnusa, the bread of faith. Jews do not preach faith, we eat it. Because Matzah is the bread of faith. It represents that moichin de abba. What happened on the night of Pesach? On the night of Pesach, there was a revelation of the Melech, Malchei Hamlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem himself, he did not send an emissary, he didn't send an angel, he didn't send a seraph, he went himself. He revealed himself in Egypt and took the Jewish people out of Egypt. The Haggadah says, Ani hu v'loi acher, I am he, nobody else. Not through an emissary, not through an angel, and so on and so forth. There was a revelation of Hashem himself in Mitzrayim. And the reason was because this was such a place of depravity, such a place of polytheism. It was necessary for Hashem himself to extract his nation and to covenant them, going out of Egypt. And he did so with this simple food of matzah, that every single night thereafter, the Jews throughout all generations would eat this flat bread, this dogon, this grain, that allowed them to call abba, to call to their Father in heaven. And that's why it's called Michla de Mehemnusa. In fact, the Zohar gives another name to it and calls it Michla de Asvasa, the bread of healing. There is a beautiful teaching of the Rebbe in Hayom Yom, where he says that the first night of the Seder is Michla de Mehemnusa, the bread of faith, and the second night is Michla de Asvasa, the bread of healing. And it's better that the faith should bring the healing rather than the healing should bring the faith. The idea is that by eating matzah, this injects almost intravenous, intergastronomic, if that's the right word, into a Jew and their soul, emunah, faith in Hashem. By the way, just before we continue, we can now understand why the Rebbe was so insistent about matzah shmura and giving it out to everybody. We said that the sadiq hador is the Baal Teshuvah. He's the owner of Teshuvah in the generation. What greater thing can the sadiq of the generation give a Jew than an emunah pill? It's this little piece of food that gives them emunah. And it's not a machine-baked square matzah, but rather this is a hand-baked, bespoke shemura delivered direct to a person's soul. It's bread of faith. When we eat that matzah, we link up with all the previous generations. We link up vertically with all the past souls, and we look forward to the time that the soul within us will surface fully, will serve Hashem individually and nationally, and precipitate the coming of Mashiach. It's that night that we transcend time, look backwards, the first days of Pesach, and look forwards, the last days of Pesach. And it's the matzah, the bread of faith, that injects us with that emunah, with that tremendous faith in Hashem, that carries us right throughout this bitter exile, hopefully very soon to our destination. So now we can understand why Pesach is a festival that for an entire week we need to eat matzah. Shivas yomim tochel matzahs. Yes, although the obligation is only the first night, as we said, but nevertheless, for the other 7 days of Pesach, we still need to avoid chametz. What does that mean? The period between the festival of Pesach and Shavuos is called the Sephirah, the 49-day count up to Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. Kabbalistically, those 7 weeks are weeks in which we need to work on our midos, on our character traits, and refine them. For that first week, we need to inject moichin the abba. Shivas yomim tochal matzahs means that for all 7 weeks of the Sphira, we need to bring in moichin the abba. But the most important week is the first week, because that first week, which represents the midah of chesed, goes with all the other midos, and we need to bring in the matzah. Yes, although it's not obligatory, it's only obligatory on the first night, but nevertheless, we must shun chametz for all the days of Pesach, and eat matzah for those 7 days, reminding ourselves and infusing ourselves with emunah that we need to illuminate our souls. We need to move out of the servitude and the bondage to our yetzer hara, to our evil inclination. And we need to move towards Sinai. We need to move towards revealing the matzah, the godly soul, the divine within us. And this is the secret of achilas matzah, of eating matzah on Seder night. And so Hashem should help each one of us that when we come to the Seder this year and we take out the matzah, you know, the mitzvah halachically is to eat a kazayas of matzah, which is 27 grams of matzah. It's about a third of a large shmura matzah. And I think this year, it would be a very beautiful thing if for those 4 minutes, because halachically you're supposed to eat the matzah within 4 minutes, with those 4 minutes that we're eating the matzah, that we're eating that kazayas, that 27 grams, 1 ounce of matzah, we should just think about this concept of moichin de abba, of michle de meheimnusa, the bread of faith, of how ever deep our perception, our understanding is. There's something that transcends that. And our bitul, our nullification this evening, is to the Melech Malchei Hamlochim, is to the King of all kings. It's to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we dedicate ourselves on Pesach to Hashem and to his mitzvahs, that is the foundation of all our faith. And that's why Pesach, this quantum leap out of Egypt, is so important. And it's so important to ingest that faith, take it within, integrate it, not as blind faith, but as deep intellectual faith, and faith, most importantly, that is pronounced in our thought, speech, and action. Hashem should give us all that even before this Pesach, in the merit of all we've done till now, we should merit for Mashiach to come, and that we should eat already the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, in Yerushalayim, b'mheira b'yameinu, Amen.